He's finished as a top 20 wide receiver once in his career. It's going to be a three-headed committee. They're undervaluing the rushing floor, and they're confusing NFL prowess with fantasy prowess.
Matthew Berry, the man behind Fantasy Life, Fantasy Football Happy Hour, and so much more. We've got a lot to talk about. But first, I can't bring you on, a known Washington Commanders fan, and not start with Jacory Crosket-Merritt, a name that a lot of people are starting to learn, whether it's Jacory or whether it's Bill. Like, how excited are you for this young rookie running back who has kind of burst onto the scene to the point where he's pushing people out of the door?
Yeah, I'm super excited about it. 7th-round draft pick. You know, it's interesting. So we've talked about him a lot on Fantasy Football Happy Hour. My guy, Connor Rogers, who's my co-host, is as good a draft person as I've ever met. And going into the NFL draft, like before he gets a team, if you go back and look at this, going into the NFL draft, Connor had Jacory Crosket-Merritt as a pre-NFL draft prospect. He had him ranked higher than RJ Harvey. So, and he just said, you know, Connor's point about Crosket-Merritt was, and I know everyone's just like, well, why didn't we hear about this guy? He had this weird eligibility issue where when he'd been in New Mexico, like he was actually redshirting, but some kid like used his number. And so played a game in his jersey or something like that. And so the NCAA thought he had played a game and he had, and blah, blah, blah. And so he basically only got to play he didn't get to really play for Arizona. But Connor feels like had he gotten to play a full season at Arizona, he would have been probably like a day 2 pick. He probably would have been like a 3rd rounder or something like that. Like that's the kind of talent he had. He ended up falling to the 7th. I was talking with JP Finley, who covers the Commanders, does such a great job. I was talking with him earlier today, and I asked him about, we were talking about JCM, and he said, you know, it's interesting because the Commanders had like this private event at Top Golf prior to the NFL draft, where they just invited a bunch of NFL players to come and hang out, and, you know, guys that they were really interested in. They wanted to sort of see how they acted in a social situation. And Jacory Crosket-Merritt was one of the guys they invited. So he's not just some random day 3, 7th round pick. I think Adam Peters got himself a steal. Now, as it relates to fantasy football, I'll just say this. For as exciting as we all are about Jacory Crosket-Merritt, and we've been talking because of when Connor ranks him higher than RJ Harvey, I'm like, all right, damn, let me see. And then, so I have him in a bunch of dynasty leagues. I've tweeted about it. We've talked about him all offseason on Fantasy Football Happy Hour. Okay. But as much as we're all in the fantasy community excited about JCM, and it looks like Brian Robinson is on his move away from the Commanders, and so there'll be some real opportunity there in a high-powered offense. Chris Rodriguez is the guy that actually got the run with a first-team offense last night. He was the guy, and by the way, he's good. They used him last year. My expectation is, talking to my team sources around Washington, they really like – part of the reason they're getting rid of Brian Robinson, or they're moving on from him, last year was rookie deal. They're going to have to pay him. They're not going to use an extent. You know, they're probably not going to, because they like their young guys. So can they get something for him right now where he's still under a rookie deal? So they're shopping, and we'll see how that all plays out.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, go on.
I was going to say it's going to be a committee. It's going to be a 3-headed committee with Jacory Crosket-Merritt, Chris Rodriguez, and Austin Eckler. And I think JCM has the chance to kind of, quote, pardon the pun, run away with that job. But at the moment, I think on opening day against the Giants, all 3 running backs are going to touch the ball. So it's going to be great for the Commanders, but frustrating for fantasy.
Yeah, it feels like one of those where we can bank on some as the season opens up and we get to know it a bit better. But like Chris Rodriguez, you know him. A lot of us in deeper leagues where we're starting multiple flex positions, we got to know him last year when we were getting really desperate during bye weeks, but he only has 89 touches going into his 3rd year. But it really does feel like Jacory or Bill just adds a bit more juice than they were getting out of Brian Robinson. Like Brian Robinson, I was high on last year, but it did not work out. And hopefully he finds a new team and somewhere exciting. But we are going to dive into some players who perhaps our feelings about them, or where we've got them ranked, where you've got them ranked, differs a little to ADP. I wanted to start at the quarterback position with Justin Fields, because you pointed this out in one of your columns recently, but in the history of the NFL, there have only been 3 quarterbacks to average at least 50 rushing yards per game: Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, and Justin Fields. Do you think that people still are just undervaluing that rushing floor that Justin Fields is going to bring to the Jets this year?
They are. They're undervaluing the rushing floor, and they're confusing NFL prowess with fantasy prowess. That's the problem. People forget. Blake Bowers was a top Blake Bortles was a top 10 fantasy quarterback. Tim Tebow was a top 10 fantasy quarterback when he was starting for the Denver Broncos. Like, again, they see some of the missed passes. They see some of the practice throws where he's missing kind of easy stuff. And they're just like, oh, this guy can't play quarterback. And I think the jury is still out as to whether or not he is an NFL franchise quarterback. But fantasy-wise, anytime this kid has gotten a chance, he has produced. Last year in Pittsburgh, with not much around him, he was QB 7 in fantasy points per game for the Steelers in the 6 games that he started for Pittsburgh last year. In 2023, he was QB 9. In 2022, he was QB 5. With the Bears, again, not surrounded by a lot. And I would argue that, the Jets is as good, if not better, a situation as he's ever been in. In Pittsburgh, obviously, he had Russell Wilson over his shoulder, and it was a run-first offense with, George Pickens really being the only alpha wide receiver. And we like George Pickens, but George Pickens, if he runs the right route, it's a miracle, right? He's just going down there and you're throwing it up and hoping he makes a play, which he's athletic enough to do. Okay. And at the Bears, it was a disaster. His best receiver was Darnell Mooney. Now he's going to the Jets. He's got Breece Hall out of the backfield. He's got Garrett Wilson. They're going to be run heavy. They're going to design a lot of runs for Justin Fields. There's not a lot of pass catchers that you like after Garrett Wilson, but I do think just the rushing floor is high. Again, think about that. For his career, he's been around for a while now. For his career, he averages over 50 rushing yards a game. And so if you sit here and say, listen, even if he's a disaster, he probably can get to 175 passing yards a game and a touchdown. So if you're saying he's got a shot at a passing touchdown, 175 yards and 50 rushing yards, suddenly you're there. And if he happens to run for a touchdown or throw for 2, I don't understand how people don't have this guy as a top 10 quarterback. Again, because the rushing floor, the rushing ability gives him such a floor on a week in, week out basis. And that there's a chance that Aaron Glenn, who's as good a player's coach as there is in the NFL, figures that out with him. Because for the first time in his life, he comes into Chicago as a savior, but they surround him with nothing. It's a complete disaster of an organization. Pittsburgh, it's here's Russell Wilson, Super Bowl winner, future Hall of Famer, blah, blah, blah. Now he comes to the Jets where he got paid. They brought him in, new organization, Aaron Glenn, head coach, new culture, blah, blah, blah. They're you're the guy and we're going to support you. And you don't have to look over your shoulder. We're not pulling you for Tyrod Taylor. You're the man. So, give me some Justin Fields this year.
Yeah, and you can see on your site, Fantasy Life, in the consensus rankings over there, which I'm a big fan of. I love being able to see everything organized nicely, as well as the change in ADP. But he's sitting at QB 13, and I can't fathom taking him behind Jared Goff, who's lost Ben Johnson this year, and who faces a trickier schedule, more outdoor games. And you've got him ranked at number 9. I think I have him ranked number 10th in my rankings. And I just really struggle to see how he finishes lower than that. And particularly when he did play with the Steelers, it felt like he was playing it safe a little bit at time. But that led to better levels of completion rate, fewer interceptions than we'd previously seen. So with Garrett Wilson, with competent running backs as well, I think that we do see a step taken forward from Justin Fields. And I'm excited for how this season can play out. If you're finding us for the first time, this is the Fantasy Sanctuary. I'm Tom Strachan. Obviously, Matthew Berry. Please, whilst you're here, take a second to hit subscribe. We've got year-round fantasy content covering Dynasty, Best Ball, and Redraft, and we have a massive few weeks to get you set up for the 2025 season. Let's go over to Fields' former team, DK Metcalf, one of the biggest trades that we saw this year. And I love watching DK Metcalf play football. The guy is an absolute monster. You watch the sheer acceleration he has. You go back to that viral clip against Arizona where he chased down the defender on the pick 6. Oh. DK Metcalf is fun, but I don't find myself drafting him very often. And that's continued even with him going to Pittsburgh. You've got him as your wide receiver 27 compared to the Fantasy Life consensus ranking of wide receiver 20. For you, is it just too much of a leap to assume that his target share being massive in this Steelers offense is going to be worth it alone?
Yeah, I think it's the easy analysis. He's the only game in town. You've got Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, he's going to get peppered with targets. But I don't think people are overestimating Arthur Smith and his ability to get the ball to a number 1 wide receiver, right? Again, in the last 4 seasons, Arthur Smith has been a head coach or offense coordinator, right? With the Steelers, and then before that with the Falcons. In those 4 years, No receiver has ever finished higher than 31st in total fantasy points or points per game. And he's had some pretty good guys over that course. In fact, the only wide receiver that's actually finished top 20 under Arthur Smith was A.J. Brown's rookie year with Ryan Tannehill, where Tannehill would, just chucked a bunch of bombs. And that was in Tennessee where they weren't that good and they're throwing a decent amount and they actually have a pretty good offense. And, they had Derrick Henry, so they were able to, do a lot of play action as well. Here's another stat for you. With Arthur Smith as a head coach or offense coordinator, the most targets a wide receiver has ever received in any of those years was Drake London in 2022. He got 117 targets. Okay. DK Metcalf has played in the NFL for 6 years, and there are 2 of those 6 years where he did not get at least 117 targets. And in both of those seasons, he had under 1,000 yards, and he finished outside the top 30 among wide receivers. I also think, Tom, I mean, by the way, he's finished as a top 20 wide receiver once in his career, DK Metcalf. When he's played with Russell Wilson, peak Russell Wilson, and now he's going to Aaron Rodgers, and I think the jury is still out at how elite, how good a talent is Aaron Rodgers at this point, and how good is he going to be in Pittsburgh, where he's playing in cold weather, outdoors, against the Browns, twice, the Ravens twice, the Bengals. All right, those are 2 good matchups. But my point is, look, how does Mike Tomlin want to win games? He's going to play good defense. He's going to have Arthur Smith run the hell out of the ball. He's going to try to win every game 20-17. I just don't think that this is suddenly a high. DK Metcalf is going to be very touchdown dependent, and he's probably going to get some. But I think the idea that he's going to have this monster season because he's quote unquote the only game in town, I think is misguided.
It's just such a difficult leap with so many different personalities in Pittsburgh as well. Like we've seen from Aaron Rodgers last year, he was throwing the ball in more contested catch type passes than he has in previous years. But then he had Devontae Adams there. He had Garrett Wilson, who he'd had 2 off seasons with. So even though it didn't work out on the field, they had the time to develop a bond. Whereas with DK Metcalf, they've had just this off season together. And for all the reasons you kind of mentioned, it just feels like DK Metcalf is a more fun player in theory than what we've seen. And as somebody who's been very high on Drake London for the last couple of years, I remember all too well what Arthur Smith did to Drake London. So I'm right there with you on DK Metcalf. Let's move on and talk about Calvin
By the way,
Ridley.
Just to keep in mind, just to one further thing about your point, he hasn't even had the full offseason. Remember, Rodgers showed up late. He didn't sign until July because he didn't want to deal with the OTAs. He's a veteran, and he's just and he knew that if he knew he wasn't going to be at OTAs, this is what I hear from a source. He knew he wasn't going to be at OTAs, and he knew that if he had signed with the Steelers and missed OTAs, it becomes a story. And so he didn't sign until July on purpose so that it's not, you can't ask about a player that isn't there if he's not on the team. And but again, it sort of shortens the window that he has time to get familiar with Smith's offense, to get some chemistry with DK Metcalf. So I'm out on him this year.
Let's talk Calvin Ridley. Last year, 78th of 85 wide receivers with 50-plus targets and catchable target rate. Will Levis absolutely killed his fantasy value, but when Ridley did have the ball, he ranked 15th in missed tackles forced, 8th in yards per reception, still hit over 1,000 yards. And I looked at his player prop line the other day, and it's set at 924. He's being discounted by almost 100 yards, but he's got Cam Ward, the number 1 overall selection in the draft, a guy who reports are raving about all summer. Do you think that people are still too hung up on what happened with Calvin Ridley in Atlanta, or maybe when he went to the Jags and it wasn't quite as explosive as we hoped? Or do you think that people are just more down on Tennessee because of what they were last year?
I think it's all of this. I think it's all the above. It's just he was in Jacksonville and whatever. And then he goes to Tennessee, which is also kind of a snoozy team. And he's been around for a while and he was out of the league for a year. He's just, just a bunch of things. But to your point about the catchable target rate, and I think that's so dead on. I mean, raising it higher, the thing that I did in my 100 facts column, last season, there were 21 different players who had at least 120 targets. And of those 21 players, no one had a higher off-target rate than Calvin Ridley. Same thing in terms of, the
Yeah.
lowest catchable target rate. He only had 4 games last year, Tom. He only had 4 games last year where he got 7 or more catchable targets. And right. But in those 4 games where he got at least 7 catchable targets, he averaged over 18 fantasy points per game. He was averaging 18.3 fantasy points per game. And so now you get Cam Ward. And by the way, his competition for targets is, Tyler Lockett, Chigakonkwo, they like the rookie tight end there too. But like it's Calvin Ridley's going to get like a 35% target share on a team that's going to throw. Brian Callahan from Cincinnati, former OC there. He wants to be a pass first team. He's going to have to be. And so I think Ridley is a screaming value in drafts. He's just not sexy. No one likes him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
And one of the things that I'm always looking for with the rookie quarterbacks is like, how good is the offensive line around them? And they just saw that as a priority. They brought in guys with experience. They also drafted a couple of guys. They made sure that they weren't setting their rookie up for failure in the way that Caleb Williams last year walked into a bit of a hellhole in Chicago because the line was pretty poor. And we've seen that time and time again over years. Look back to when the Browns were drafting quarterbacks every year. It's like, if the line isn't good, then you're going to struggle. Now, if this line's anywhere near competent, and if Cam Ward's anywhere near competent, I find it really hard to believe that we don't end up seeing Calvin Ridley paying off. Like, he sits at 69th in consensus ADP over on Fantasy Life, ranked number 51 in your overall rankings. I'm at number 48. I'm very bullish on Calvin Ridley this year, and I want him in Dynasty, Best Ball Redraft, whatever the format. I think that he's going to be good. But look, if you're watching this video
and Guillotine Leagues, guillotineleagues.com.
Well, yeah, definitely.
I think guillotineleagues.com.
Do you think he's the kind of player who could be undervalued a bit in guillotine leagues? Whereas, like, if he gets off to a hot start, that's the kind of thing that you want, isn't it? To give yourself a nice steady base, and
you want
just
that floor.
You want to be not the worst team in week 1, not the worst team in week 2, so that you can get to a point where it's like, now the waivers are starting to fill up, and I can start to add much sexier names to the team.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Cool. Well, people, let us know in the comments if you are in or out on Calvin Ridley this year. We are closing in on 4,000 subscribers over here on the Fantasy Sanctuary. Coming up this week, I've got Matthew's good friend Ian Hartitz, and we're going to rank the 10 funnest fantasy picks this year. We've got loads of other great guests over the next 2 weeks, lots of fun content, and lots of great strategy stuff to get you set up to win. Caleb Williams. Now, I mentioned him before that he wasn't really set up to win last year, but he's had Ben Johnson come in, which is such a huge upgrade. Like, he was the number 1 target for so many people this offseason for coaching. And then Ben Johnson says this weekend that Williams has been really locked in, had his best run of practices since they started working together in the spring. And it did sound a little bumpy this offseason. But after the lack of coaching that was plain and obvious to see, the various reports that we've seen, maybe Williams needed Ben Johnson to come in and be quite hard on him. How optimistic are you about Caleb taking a step and showing people that he can be the guy that we thought he could be a year ago when everybody was raving about him?
Yeah, I mean, I think the jury is still out in terms of, again, whether he can be a franchise quarterback. But there's a reason why he was so highly considered, why he went number 1 overall. I think what's exciting for fantasy-wise is that he runs more than people think he does. This guy gets you about 30 rushing yards a game. And no team, I think, improved their offensive line more this offseason than the Chicago Bears. And the point I made in my 100 facts column, right, is that last season when he was pressured, Caleb Williams had a 35% off-target rate. That was the 3rd highest rate among all qualified quarterbacks. When he was pressured, he was bad, right? Stands to reason. Well, but when he wasn't pressured, when you actually gave Caleb Williams time, he had the 4th best touchdown to interception rate in the NFL. And so you think about that like when you gave Caleb Williams times, even in a dysfunctional offense, with a bad offensive line and, head coach was a disaster and fighting with the front office and just the whole thing went to crap last year. Even still, when you gave him time, he actually was semi-special. He had moments. There were moments last year where he would make throws and be like, oh, okay. Now there you go. And so I think fortifying the offensive line, in essence, giving him more time, adding Colston Loveland, adding Luther Burden to DJ Moore and Roma Dunze and Cole Kmet and, all the players there, not to just list players as fantasy analysis. But the fact is that I think they are setting it up to succeed. And I thought Ben Johnson's opening press conference was really smart and informative, where he basically said, look, I've been brought here. He didn't say it this way, but he just said, we're building our offense around Caleb. Not like we're going to come in here and, we're going to do what we do. I've got a Ben Johnson stuff. He's going to be like, in essence, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said, I'm going to figure out what Caleb likes to do, what he doesn't like to do, and we're going to tailor the offense to what he likes to do. And we're going to avoid all the crap he doesn't like to do. And we're going to put him in a position to succeed. Like Ben Johnson was hired to fix Caleb Williams. Full stop.
Yeah.
And I think he will.
Yeah, I love your point about the rushing touchdowns as well, because I think it was Dave Kluge, Football Guys, put it out on Twitter this weekend that Caleb Williams had more rushing yards per game than Bo Nix last year, but because Bo Nix had 4 touchdowns, Williams had 0. Nix is getting that fantasy cheat code label, and nobody's really talking up Caleb Williams. But you can see 114th in consensus ADP, ranging between sort of like 124, 125 in ESPN Sleeper, and some was way slightly higher. Ranked 109th for you, Matthew. I'm at 112, and I don't want to give up on a player like Caleb Williams so quickly, and sometimes that can burn you, guys like Trevor Lawrence, where we just keep hanging on, and maybe this finally is the year for Trevor Lawrence, but you can absolutely...
I do actually like Trevor Lawrence this year. I think this is going to be, I think fantasy-wise, again, difference between fantasy and real NFL, but like Liam Cohen is going to throw the hell out of the ball. They're going to throw the hell out of the ball this year.
Yeah, so I'm definitely willing to give Caleb another year, and then maybe next year, if it's still looking miserable, it'll be time to reassess. Moving over to David Njokue, and you mentioned guillotine leagues. Now, I know that they are big for yourself. Now, is David Njokue somebody that you could trust in a guillotine league or in redraft leagues where, getting those weekly wins or not losing in the case of guillotine leagues, it matters a lot. Now, we know Joe Flacco is going to be the starting quarterback, and we know in 2023 how good this pairing was. But it also just feels like there is an element of risk with this Cleveland offense.
For sure. Honestly, once you get past the elite tight ends, there's always a risk. But I will say that last year, Njokue was targeted on over 25% of his routes. That was the 5th highest rate in the NFL. Stefanski's always used a tight end effectively. Njokue is an unbelievable blocker. He's an unbelievable run blocker. And so when you think about how Kevin Stefanski runs his offense, he wants to do a lot of play action. He wants to run and take pressure off the ball and throw it deep. So because he is such a good run blocker, he never comes off the field. And then they use him and he'll block or he'll chip and he'll release. The 5, you mentioned Joe Flacco, right? I mean, so whatever, the 5 games that they started, he kept targeting Njokue, 22% target share in those 5 games with Flacco, average over 18 fantasy points per game. 18.2 to be specific. Last year, 18.2 not only would have been the number 1 tight end in fantasy, it would have been the number 1 tight end in fantasy by 2 points. It's going as tight end 9. Yeah. And so even if you say, okay, it's 2 years later, Flacco's old, he's probably not going to keep the job the whole year. I get all that, but he's still a big red zone threat. He doesn't come down. And then you sort of think about what's his competition for targets? Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman, not a lot. And I will say this about the Cleveland Browns offense. They're going to be competent. I'm not saying they're going to be great. I'm not going to say they're going to light the world on fire, but you're oh, well, how long does Joe Flacco keep the job? And my answer is long enough, because the only whatever level Joe Flacco is, and I think he is solid enough to get the ball to the guys we care about for fantasy. He's going to chuck it a lot, right? But they're not replacing Joe Flacco with Dylan Gabriel or Shadur Sanders or Kenny Pickett unless they feel like it's an equal or better level, that they're seeing something in practice, right? And so, and whatever, all the cliches, young quarterback's best friend, a tight end, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, my point is that Kevin Stefanski is too good of an NFL coach, too good of an offensive mind to make this offense be putrid. It's not going to be great. It's not going to be high scoring, but it's going to be competent. And as we get into as we start looking at sort of later round tight ends outside the top 5 or 6 after the elite guys, give me some David Njokue.
Yeah, I love this tier of tight ends in general. Mark Andrews, I think still has enough fantasy value that I'm interested. I'm a Ravens fan, so I'm always going to have a little bit of bias towards him. Tucker Kraft, I feel like, is easily one of the breakout candidates of the year. Little cooler on Evan Ingram. So when it comes down to David Njokue and Evan Ingram, for me, it's an easy click on Njokue. And as you mentioned, he plays on play action so much. I think that's a big part of what led to him leading all tight ends and end zone targets last year. Because if you were playing on play action, if you play around the goal line like that, it makes it so much easier for you to get those targets. And a lot of young tight ends could really benefit from looking at the way that David Njokue plays the game. I want to touch on one last player before we get out of here, Matthew. Your guy, Omarion Hampton, your ride or die player for the year. Now, when you named him your ride or die, he was RB20, going around 50th in consensus ADP. Since then, the situation with Najee Harris has continued to look bleaker and bleaker. Now he's 41st in overall consensus ADP over on Fantasy Life, RB17. Are you willing to keep taking him as his price gets more expensive? Like, how high are you willing to chase your guy for 2025?
Yeah, I mean, I have him as a top 13 guy, and I know some people, like, after I announced it, of course, 2 days later, I think Rashawn Slater out for the year, not great, but they'll run to the right side. I just believe he's a special talent, and I still think there's profit to be had even at RB17. Like I said, I think he's going to wind up. I think he's double-digit touchdowns. I think he's over probably 1,200 yards from scrimmage. I think he gets used more in the pass game than probably people think that they're going to. I know Greg Roman offenses have traditionally not thrown to the running back, but they've also been with like Tyrod Taylor and Lamar Jackson, who don't need to throw to the running back because they can just duck it and run. Herbert is mobile, but he's not like those guys. And so I do think Hampton, who is a good pass catching running back, who is already proficient in pass protection, I don't think he's coming off the field on third down. I think Hampton will get like 2 series, Harris will get 1. 2 series, Harris will get 1. Harris is on a 1-year prove-it deal. That's even assuming he can get back on the field. Hampton, they use a first-round pick. Like, when you think about Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman and the Chargers front office, using a first-round pick on a running back, that should be
Joe Ortiz. Joe Ortiz,
and
who
Joe
came from the Ravens.
for sure came from the Ravens. Obviously wants to run. And the other thing that I will tell you, I don't have a stat for this, Tom, but I was on the field. So NBC, we had the preseason Hall of Fame game. And so I'm on the field for Football Night in America because that was our game. And I'm walking around, I'm talking to a bunch of the Chargers players. Devin McCourty and I are walking the field together. Devin's my buddy. And so, Devin, of course, knows all the defensive players. So as we're talking, I ended up talking with Gibbs and Goff, and I got a bunch of offensive players too. But when I'm walking with Devin, we're talking to all the defensive players of the Chargers. And so we're checking, how's it going, blah, blah. And I'm like, hey, what do you think of Hampton? What do you think of the kid? And they're all like, dude, he's the real deal. He's a real, he hits hard, he runs hard in practice. We don't like tackling him. It's practice. Take it easy. And they're like, he runs hard. They're like, you can tell, first round running back. So they were just all, they could not stop singing his praises. And just so you know, for people like, well, of course, what are they going to say? And I'll say oh no, some of the defensive players, because it's off the record. We're just BSing before the game. They would tell Devin oh yeah, that guy's soft, or this guy, as we're talking about just general other players potentially on the team or around the league. They're not all singing. They're not singing the praises of everyone, is what I'll say. They're fairly honest.
I mean, that counts for so much. And just going back to the pass catching thing, look, as a Ravens fan, I remember the days under Greg Roman, and Greg Roman and Lamar, they didn't necessarily have elite pass catching running backs either. J.K. Dobbins can catch the ball, but he's not a great pass catcher. Gus Edwards certainly wasn't. But you go back to 2022, which seems like a long time ago, but that was Austin Eckler at his peak. The Chargers were first at running back target share with a 26% rate. So Justin Herbert is happy to check down and pass to the running back when the situation is right. So, yeah, I'm really excited for Omarion Hampton. I think he's going to be a lot of fun. Matthew, this has been an awful lot of fun. I am a Fantasy Life subscriber. I'm a RotoPass subscriber. But for anybody who's not, is there anything in particular that people should be checking out and subscribing for right now?
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, our ADP tool, we've got, if you do best ball, we have a ridiculous best ball tool as well. I think our fantasy HQ tool, when we get into season, is going to blow your mind, where it just it allows you to sync every league across every platform all on one page as well. I think Dwayne's utilization HQ his utilization report and all the stats there, I think it's as good a deep dive data resource as there is on the internet. as there is in fantasy. Dwayne's done a great job building that, and it's incredible. If you read my 100 facts, a lot of the stuff that I got from my 100 facts was thanks to Dwayne's utilization report.
Excellent. Well, that article is linked in the description below. We are big fans of Dwayne around here. Always a good time when he drops in with us. We will have Ian Hartitz on the show in the next couple of days.
He's
if
great.
you haven't already, he is, and we're going to have a lot of fun with him. If you haven't already, hit a like. Let us know which players you're in or out on this year, and make sure you subscribe because it is going to be a very fun 2025 fantasy football season.